There's a very specific kind of silence that happens right before your life implodes. It's not peaceful. It's not calm. It's loud in a way that makes your ears ring, like your body is trying to brace for something it already knows is coming. That was the silence I sat in the moment I opened Ethan's email. I was at my desk, halfway through drafting a report for the HR audit we had coming up next week. I remember the scent of my coffee, still warm, still full. The sound of coworkers typing, printers humming. My hands trembled before I even read the message, almost like my body knew what my mind hadn't caught up with yet. The subject line was short, just my name. Rachel. No, hi, no, hope you're well, no, love you. I clicked it, and in an instant, the foundation of the life I had built for over a decade shattered. Ethan said he was in love with someone else, that he was leaving me, that he needed to start fresh. He said he was taking the car, the one we bought together, but the one registered under my name. And just like that, he was gone. No face-to-face conversation. No goodbye to our 11-year-old son, Liam. No warning, just a digital grenade lobbed into my inbox. At first, I laughed, not because it was funny, because the absurdity was so sharp it cut clean through my sense of reality. I sat there for 5 full minutes, staring at the screen, waiting for the punchline, for him to walk through the door and say, "Gotcha." But he didn't. He never did. By the time I got home that night, the driveway was empty. So was his closet. And the worst part? The savings account. Our just-in-case fund. All $45,000 of it, gone. Drained. He left nothing. No note. No voice message. Not even a text. That night, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the microwave clock, wondering how I was going to explain to Liam that the man who tucked him in 2 nights ago wasn't coming back. That the dream vacation we had planned with the camper van we hadn't even picked up yet was gone, just like his father. How do you tell your child that the man he looks up to just disappeared? That the fairy tale he thought he lived in wasn't real? I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just stood in our living room, the one I decorated with secondhand furniture and so much love, feeling like I had walked into someone else's nightmare. The next morning, I called the dealership, trying to cancel the loan on the camper van. But the paperwork had already been finalized. Ethan didn't qualify for the loan because of his spotty work history. I did. It was my name on every single dotted line, my debt, my problem. When I asked the bank about reversing the withdrawal from our joint savings account, they politely told me that he had authorization. We were still legally married, which meant he had the right to take everything except the guilt. That was mine alone. I called him, over and over. Each time the call rang out and sent me to voicemail, I left a message more desperate than the last. Ethan, this isn't you. Ethan, think about Liam. Please just talk to me. But silence answered every time. In the weeks that followed, I became a stranger to myself. I went to work. I packed Liam's lunch. I paid bills I couldn't afford, but inside I was a walking corpse, alive, but unraveling. And Liam. Oh, Liam. He noticed. "Mom," he said one evening, pushing his broccoli around his plate. "You haven't smiled in days." I lied, of course, told him I was just tired, told him work was stressful. But Liam, wise beyond his years, looked me dead in the eye and said, "When people lie, they look up and to the right. You just did that." It was like he could see right through me, and in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just losing my marriage. I was on the verge of losing myself. The pain wasn't just emotional. It became physical. One afternoon, during a routine onboarding training at work, I felt a tightness in my chest. My vision blurred. I couldn't breathe. And before I knew it, I collapsed. Just fell to the floor like my body had given up. I woke up in the hospital, with an IV in my arm and Liam clutching my hand, tears brimming in his eyes but refusing to fall. "You're not going to die, right?" he asked me, his voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 unspoken fears. "I'm not going anywhere," I whispered, even though I wasn't so sure. The doctors told me I had pushed my body too hard. Stress, malnutrition, fatigue. They wanted to run more tests that would later reveal something far worse than exhaustion. But I wasn't ready to face that yet, not while everything else was falling apart. Back home, the financial pressure crushed me. The camper van, gone. The payments, still mine. $38,000 in loans, utilities, school fees, groceries, and a $29.90 balance left in the bank. Liam, watching me drown, did something I'll never forget. He came to me with a folded sheet of paper. "I made a list," he said. "A list?" "Yeah. Jobs I can do. Paper delivery, online surveys, dog walking. I'll help Mom." That boy, that beautiful, brilliant boy, was willing to give up his childhood to help clean up a mess he didn't make. And in that moment, I made a vow. I wouldn't let this destroy us. I wouldn't let Ethan's betrayal be the end of our story. I held on to one thing, the GPS app on Liam's smartwatch, the one I insisted we install after a hiking scare 6 months ago. I opened the app. My fingers trembled, and there it was, a blinking dot in Sedona, Arizona, the camper van. He had taken it, driven it cross-country, started a new life with her, his girlfriend, his fresh start, using our money, our memories, our future. But what Ethan didn't know was this. The woman he left behind wasn't broken. She was just getting started. If you've been through something like this, if someone tried to bury you and walk away, I want you to remember something. Seeds grow in darkness. And I was about to bloom in the most unexpected way. Don't forget to subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps this channel continue to bring real, raw, powerful stories to life. Let's keep going, together. Now, let me ask you something. If you found out your partner secretly drained your savings and ran off with someone else, would you go straight to the police and fight legally? B, wait and try to understand why they did it first? Type your answer in the comments. A or B. I want to hear what you would do. There's something cruel about the quiet that follows chaos. It doesn't soothe you. It doesn't give you peace. It simply leaves you alone with the wreckage, asking yourself the questions you never wanted to ask. In the weeks after Ethan vanished, I stopped looking for answers and started trying to survive. There was no manual for being abandoned, no step-by-step guide for putting your life back together after the person you trusted most destroyed it. I remember the first Monday back at work. Everything looked the same. The potted plant on my desk, the hum of the air conditioner, the morning chatter by the coffee machine. But I wasn't the same. I walked through the day like I was wearing someone else's skin. I nodded when I was supposed to, smiled when it was expected. But inside, I was screaming. At night, it was worse. I'd lie awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, going over every detail of the last year. The long walks, the road trip talks, the someday plans. Had he been lying through all of it? Or was I just too blind to see the signs? I wanted to believe he was lost, that something had broken inside him. But the truth was simpler and far more devastating. He chose to leave, and he chose to leave us with nothing. The debt loomed over me like a second shadow. Every call from the bank was a reminder that I had been left to carry the weight alone. The camper van loan, nearly $40,000, wouldn't disappear just because he had. The late fees piled up. My credit score dropped. And with every missed payment, the walls seemed to close in a little more. But what terrified me the most wasn't the debt. It was Liam. He was watching me. Always watching. Not with fear, but with something harder to face. Quiet understanding. He never asked for more than I could give. Never complained when dinner was late or when his sneakers started falling apart at the soles. But he noticed everything. The unopened bills. The dark circles under my eyes. The silence that had replaced our evening conversations. One night, after I had tried, and failed, to cook something decent with the last few items in our fridge, he looked up from his plate and said, "You're not really here, are you?" Froze. He wasn't accusing me. He wasn't angry. He just saw it. The truth I had been trying so hard to hide. "I'm trying," I whispered. "I know," he said, "but trying's killing you." That night, I cried for the first time since Ethan left. Not the quiet, dignified tears I allowed myself in the shower. I broke down in the hallway, sobbing into my hands like a child, while Liam sat beside me and held my hand. No child should have to do that. No child should have to be the adult when their world falls apart. A few days later, my body gave out again. I collapsed at work, this time in front of my entire team during a morning meeting. The panic attack was sudden and consuming, heart racing, vision narrowing, the sensation of drowning in broad daylight. When I woke up in the hospital, there was a calm nurse adjusting my IV, and a doctor explaining that stress wasn't just taking a toll on my mind. It was killing my body, too. They ran tests, blood work, scans, and then more scans. I stopped asking questions when I saw the look on the doctor's face. "We found something," he said gently. "A chronic illness. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious. It would require surgery, treatment, recovery time I didn't have, money I didn't have, and most terrifying of all, strength I didn't know if I still possessed." Liam visited me that evening. He brought a drawing, a little cartoon version of me with a superhero cape. Underneath, he had written in crooked lettering, "My mom can do anything." I don't know how he knew I needed that. Maybe kids just know. Or maybe Liam had grown up more in the past month than most kids do in years. Either way, I taped that drawing to the hospital wall and stared at it like it was a lifeline. The days in the hospital were long and quiet. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. I wrote about the debt, the anger, the numbness. But I also wrote about the way Liam looked at me like I was still whole. About the way the nurse, Alina, always asked if I needed anything before I even spoke. About the way a stranger in the waiting room handed me a granola bar without saying a word. The world hadn't stopped being cruel, but it hadn't stopped being kind either. After a week, I was discharged. We went home to a house that felt colder than I remembered. Ethan had taken more than just money. He had taken warmth, safety, laughter, but we still had each other. Liam started doing more around the house without me asking. Dishes, laundry. He even started making simple dinners, watching recipe videos, online, and carefully writing down shopping lists based on what we could afford. One evening, I found him in the living room with a stack of books. He looked up and smiled. "I'm learning how to start a business," he said. I laughed, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. "I want to help. I can make bookmarks. Wood ones. I found a guy online who teaches woodworking for beginners." I didn't know whether to cry or hug him, so I did both. Liam began crafting bookmarks in our garage using leftover pieces of wood from old furniture. He opened a little online store and sold them for a few dollars each. The sales weren't much, but they were more than I ever expected. More than that, they were proof that we weren't helpless. We were building something. Together. But the storm wasn't over. Not even close. The bank called again. This time it wasn't about the loan. It was a fraud alert. Multiple withdrawals had been flagged, and when I checked the account history, I realized the full extent of Ethan's betrayal. He had accessed not only our joint savings, but my separate emergency fund. Money I had set aside before we were even married. Over $45,000 vanished. I filed a police report. They said it would be difficult to pursue unless we had proof he had committed identity theft. As long as we were married, Ethan had access to most of it. The legal system was not on my side. Not yet. But Liam was. Always. That night, he brought out his smartwatch and sat next to me on the couch. "Remember the GPS app?" he asked. I nodded. "I think we can find the van." We opened the app. There it was. A blinking dot in Arizona. Sedona, to be exact. The van hadn't moved in a few days. We zoomed in. A residential area. Trees. A curved driveway. We stared at it like it was some ancient treasure map. And in that moment, I realized something. We had been abandoned, robbed, broken, but we weren't lost. Not anymore. The fear was still there. It always would be. But something new had taken root beneath it. Something sharp and undeniable. A plan. We were going to find him. Not to beg, not to plead, but to reclaim what was ours. Our dignity, our property, and maybe even our peace. Because when the dust settled, we weren't just two people left behind. We were two people who refused to stay there. And this was only the beginning. There are moments when grief begins to transform, not into peace, but into motion. When the ache in your chest stops screaming and starts speaking clearly, telling you that you've had enough, that it's time to stop bracing for the next blow and start fighting for what's left. That shift happened in me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, while staring at the blinking dot on the GPS app, the exact location of the camper van Ethan had stolen along with our peace of mind. Sedona, Arizona. A long way from Charleston, but suddenly, distance didn't feel like an obstacle. It felt like a destination. That dot on the map wasn't just a vehicle. It was a line between what had been taken and what I was about to reclaim. Liam stood beside me, quiet but alert, watching my face for any sign of fear or hesitation. I gave him none. Not because I wasn't afraid. I was. But because I refused to let fear have the final word. We started planning that night. I couldn't afford a plane ticket, but I still had my old Subaru. A tank of gas, a packed cooler, and a bag of essentials became our travel budget. I borrowed a tent from a neighbor and found a few free camping spots along the way. It wasn't a vacation. It was a mission. Before we left, I met with a local legal aid clinic. A kind, sharp-eyed attorney named Karen sat with me for hours, going over the bank records, the stolen funds, and the camper van loan documents. She confirmed what I already suspected. Ethan had violated state and federal laws. Fraud. Asset theft. Possibly even identity misuse, depending on how he accessed my private account. But even more empowering was her advice on how to build a paper trail. Evidence was power, and we were going to gather every last piece of it. As Liam and I hit the road, the silence in the car wasn't awkward. It was filled with purpose. We stopped in small towns for gas and slept in a borrowed tent under unfamiliar stars. At night, we shared whispered stories and dreams we were just beginning to believe in again. One evening, while parked at a rest stop just outside Amarillo, Liam pulled out a notebook he'd been scribbling in since we left Charleston. "I'm calling it The Guide to Starting Over," he said. "What's in it?" "Things we've learned. About being brave. About not giving up. About making bookmarks when you're broke and finding camper vans with GPS." I laughed, tears welling. Up without warning. That notebook. like everything Liam had done since Ethan left, was proof that resilience wasn't taught, it was chosen. We arrived in Sedona 4 days later. It was dusk when we pulled into the neighborhood marked on the GPS. The homes were tidy, colorful, and backdropped by the breathtaking red rock formations that made Sedona famous. But all I saw was the white camper van parked in a driveway like it belonged there. It didn't. I parked a few houses down. My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat. Liam placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to do it tonight," he said. But I did. I had to see it. Had to know this wasn't just a digital blip, but real. We walked past slowly, acting like two tourists taking an evening stroll. The van was unmistakable, every detail down to the dented bumper and custom bike rack. And there, in the open garage, stood Ethan. He was laughing. Standing next to him was a woman I didn't recognize, tall, blonde, visibly pregnant. She placed her hand on his arm, and he kissed her. It was surreal, like watching a play you forgot you were cast in. I froze. Every cell in my body screamed to rush in, to demand answers, to scream until the sky cracked open. But I didn't move. I had seen enough. That night, back at our campsite, Liam and I sat in the glow of our lantern. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I replied honestly, "but I will be." And I meant it. We spent the next day gathering proof. I took pictures of the camper van, of the license plate, of Ethan and his girlfriend unloading groceries from it. We logged timestamps, recorded observations, and sent everything to Karen, our lawyer back in Charleston. Meanwhile, Liam dove into digital research. He found Ethan's new address, confirmed his girlfriend's identity, Claire, and even discovered Ethan had listed the van for rent on a travel site under the name The Freedom Ride. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't stung so much. What surprised me most was how composed Liam stayed through it all. He didn't show anger, though I knew it burned under the surface. He didn't fall apart. He became strategic, thoughtful, brave in a way most adults never master. He even set up a fake booking inquiry for the van, just to see how Ethan responded. He got a reply within the hour, full of charm and lies. "We're a young couple starting out," Ethan wrote. "This van has brought us joy and adventure. We hope it brings the same to you." It was hard to breathe after reading those words. Joy, adventure, all built on top of betrayal and theft. The next evening, we returned to the neighborhood, this time with a local officer we had contacted earlier in the day. We showed him the legal documents proving the van was in my name, the police report from Charleston, the proof of Ethan's unauthorized withdrawals. He agreed to assist with a peaceful confrontation and property recovery, provided we didn't provoke a scene. So there we were, parked behind a patrol car in the golden haze of sunset, waiting for Ethan to come home. When he did, his face drained of color the moment he saw me. He froze mid-step, like his brain couldn't compute what was happening. Claire stood behind him, hand on her swollen belly, eyes narrowed. "Rachel," he said. I didn't answer. The officer stepped forward, calmly explaining that the van was registered under my name, that it had been reported stolen, and that we were here to reclaim it. Ethan stammered. Said we were still married. Said it was a misunderstanding. Said he had borrowed the van temporarily. I held up the printed bank statements, the fraud report, the email he sent me when he left. "You didn't borrow anything," I said. "You stole. You lied. And you left us with nothing." Claire tried to interrupt, but Liam stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but every word was sharp. "You said you loved us," he said. "Why did you leave? Why didn't we matter?" Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time, the man who always had something slick to say was speechless. the officer gave Ethan two options: hand over the keys and walk away, or risk further legal action. Slowly, reluctantly, he handed me the keys. As I took them, my hands didn't shake. I thought they would. I thought I'd break down. But instead, I felt steady. Anchored, whole, for the first time in months. "You don't get to define the rest of this story," I said. "We do." We drove the van out of Sedona as night fell, Liam at my side, our headlights cutting through the dark. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We didn't need to, because for the first time in a long time, we weren't running from something. We were driving toward something else entirely. 15 years ago, I was a woman unraveling, standing at the edge of everything I thought was secure, watching it collapse into something unrecognizable. But time is strange. It stretches, it reshapes, and eventually it softens what once felt like the end. I didn't think I would survive what Ethan did to us, and for a long time I didn't care if I did. But standing here now, in a city that was never part of the plan but somehow became home, I can see every scar as part of the map that led us here. Portland smells like change. That's how I describe it to people when they ask why I left Charleston, why I didn't stay after the dust settled. I tell them I needed somewhere with seasons, somewhere that matched the cycle of who I was becoming, where rain could fall heavy and unapologetic, but always led to green, to growth. After the court hearings, the legal battles, and the long, silent nights of recovery, I found myself returning to something I hadn't touched in years: my journal. I began to write, not just about what happened, but what it meant, what I had learned, what Liam had taught me, what resilience looked like when no one was watching. Those journal pages eventually became essays. Those essays became chapters. And one day, those chapters became a book. I still remember the trembling in my hands as I held the first printed copy of it. Unbroken Lines, A Mother's Guide Through Betrayal and Back. It was never meant to be a bestseller, but it found its readers. Women who had stood in kitchens holding unpaid bills, women who had buried their heartbreak under silent strength, women who needed someone to say, "Me too," and mean it. That book opened doors I never expected. Speaking engagements, support circles, emails from strangers who had turned the last page and decided to take their first step forward. I never asked to become a voice for healing, but once I had it, I knew I had to use it for more than myself. Liam was 16 when we moved to Portland. He was quiet at first, as most teenagers are when everything changes, but he adjusted faster than I expected. He found a woodworking mentor at a local maker's space and started crafting again. This time not to survive, but to create. I'll never forget the look on his face the day he sold his first commissioned piece, a hand-carved reading bench for a local school library. He told me, "It's different when you build from choice, not from desperation." He applied to college, a year later with an essay titled, "The First Time I Saw My Mother Fall, and the Last Time I Saw Her Break." It wasn't sentimental. It was honest, sharp, forged from memory and truth. That essay earned him a full ride to the University of Washington, where he studied law with a focus on family advocacy. He works now at a legal clinic, helping people navigate custody battles, financial abuse, and domestic trauma. Some of his clients are just teenagers. Some are women like I used to be, stuck, scared, and unsure if the system is even worth trusting. He tells them stories. Not always his. Sometimes mine, sometimes fictional. But they all end with hope. Ethan never tried to make contact after the ruling. His payments come on time now, garnished from his wages as ordered by the court. I don't know where he lives. I don't ask. I don't care. That part of the story closed long ago, not with a slam, but with a whisper. Forgiveness came, but not in the way people expect. I never looked at a picture of him and said, "It's okay." I never excused what he did, but I forgave myself for loving him too long, for not seeing the cracks sooner, for believing that staying silent would keep our family intact. I let go of the guilt that wasn't mine to hold. That was forgiveness, too. Some days I still feel the weight of it all, not as pain, but as presence. A memory sitting in the back row of the auditorium when I speak to a group of women starting over. A whisper in the silence before I write the final sentence of a chapter. A glance at Liam across the dinner table, now a grown man, with the same steady eyes he had when he was just a boy trying to hold me together. We live in a small house now. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a small garden, a porch with a wind chime. I found at a thrift store. I run weekend workshops on financial literacy and emotional recovery, teaching what I wish someone had taught me. That healing isn't linear. That you can rise more than once. That you don't have to be fearless to be brave. Alina, the nurse who once adjusted my IV and reminded me I mattered, lives just 2 blocks away. We've become close friends, sisters in a quiet kind of way. On Saturdays, we volunteer together at a transitional shelter for single mothers. We don't fix their problems. We sit with them while they find their own strength. That's what matters. Last spring, Liam gave the commencement address at his law school graduation. I sat in the front row, watching him speak to a sea of bright eyes and hopeful minds. He told them about resilience, about justice, about a camper van once stolen, and a mother who taught him that running isn't always escape. Sometimes it's pursuit. After the ceremony, he hugged me for a long time. "You didn't just raise me," he said. "You showed me what survival looks like with grace." I didn't have words then. I still don't, really. Some moments aren't meant to be explained, only felt. A few weeks ago, I went back to Charleston. Not for long. Just a weekend. I wanted to see the old house one more time. The neighborhood felt smaller, like childhood homes often do when you've grown beyond them. I stood on the sidewalk, looking at the windows where Liam used to draw superheroes in the fog. Where I once stood, phone in hand, waiting for a man who never called. I didn't cry. I just stood there, breathing in the ghost of what once was. Then I pulled out a small journal, the same kind I used to write in after the hospital, and penned one final entry. I came back to remember. I leave, to live. 15 years ago, I was left behind. Today, I move forward, and that perhaps is the greatest justice of all. Not that I won, but that I continued. That I dared to love again. Myself, my life, and the possibility of something better. That I raised a son who became a man without bitterness. That I stood on the edge of destruction. And instead of falling, I built a bridge. So for anyone who is standing where I once stood, blindsided, broken, unsure, you don't need to know the entire path forward. Just take the next step. Even if your hands are shaking, even if your heart is cracked, take the step. Because healing doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we choose it. And I promise you, on the other side of survival is something softer, something stronger, something like joy. It's waiting. For you, just like it waited for me. There are wounds that close without apology, and then there are the ones that stay open just long enough to teach you who you are. 15 years have passed since Ethan walked out of our lives, leaving behind debt, betrayal, and a silence so sharp it could have split me in two. But time, I've learned, isn't a healer. It's a mirror. It shows you who you've become, who you refuse to remain, and what you chose to build in the wreckage. I never imagined my life would unfold in Portland. It wasn't a place I ever thought about when we were still a family, dreaming up weekend trips and tracing routes on maps we never followed. But this city became a refuge, a new beginning, with its gray skies and quiet streets, its libraries and bookstores and community centers where people gather to begin again. The seasons here felt like metaphors, wet, harsh, transformative, like grief, and like growth. Liam is 26 now, and every now and then, when I see him come through the door of our small, sunlit house carrying files from the legal clinic or groceries for dinner, I still catch glimpses of the boy who once offered to deliver newspapers to help keep the lights on. That same boy is now a man who defends those with no voice, who brings dignity into courtrooms and listens harder than he speaks. He's gentle, but unyielding. I see Ethan in none of him, and yet Ethan's absence helped carve Liam's depth. There's poetry in that irony. My own life didn't unfold on some grand stage, but it bloomed in quiet defiance of every limitation I once believed about myself. After we returned to Charleston with the van and the court orders behind us, I felt something inside me shift. A need to understand. Not just what had happened, but why it had shaped me the way it did. I started writing again. Not just to remember, but to make meaning of the grief, the resilience, the small wins that never made headlines, but mattered more than most things ever could. What began as therapy turned into purpose. I wrote essays about survival, letters emailed time, never sent, journals I buried and then unearthed. Eventually, they became a manuscript. I gave it a working title that sounded like a whisper: Unwritten Survival. I didn't write it for a publisher. I wrote it because I didn't want the pain to end with silence. And somehow, someone read it and passed it to someone else. A small independent press picked it up. I remember the day I held the first copy in my hands, the way the weight of it felt like closure and birth all at once. I still have that copy on my bookshelf. The spine is cracked. Not from neglect, but from use. I've read it aloud in community centers, women's shelters, book clubs, even to a group of teenage girls who had never heard a story about a woman rising from ruin without turning hard. I told them softness isn't a weakness. It's a strength that keeps beating long after you've been broken. Today, I run workshops, not just about financial literacy or legal protection, but about wholeness, about how to start over when your name has been tied to someone else's recklessness. I teach women how to read contracts and bank statements. But more importantly, I teach them how to listen to their own intuition again, how to tell the difference between a temporary storm and a permanent sinkhole, how to rebuild trust with the person staring back at them in the mirror. Sometimes they ask me what happened to Ethan. I always say the same thing: nothing worth keeping. His wages were garnished as ordered, and the payments came like clockwork, though always without a word. He never reached out, never apologized. Not when Liam graduated high school. Not when he published his first article in a legal journal. Not when the book came out. I thought I might miss that absence, but I didn't. His silence was finally a gift, one that let us grow without interruption. Claire, his former girlfriend, contacted me once, just once. It was 5 years after the custody and financial agreements had been finalized. She sent an email, short and filled with unease. She wrote that she was sorry, not for falling in love with Ethan, but for believing the story he told her about me, about us. She had left him 2 years earlier. The child, as it turned out, hadn't been his. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because I no longer needed her words to make sense of mine. The final trace of that past is the camper van. We sold it 10 years ago. I remember standing beside it, hand on the driver's side mirror, watching the new owners sign the title. It had served its purpose. It had taken us to confrontation, through resolution, and now it was time for it to carry someone else forward. We used the proceeds to pay off the last of the debts. Whatever was left, we saved for Liam's college transition. It was the last transaction I made that was tied to Ethan's name. But even as we moved forward, we didn't forget. Remembering became a discipline, not a prison. On difficult anniversaries, days that used to feel like quiet funerals, we found ways to honor how far we'd come. Sometimes it was a shared hike. Sometimes a small dinner. Sometimes just a silent cup of coffee together before the day began. A moment to say, "We're still here." We kept going. Last year, I was invited to speak at a university conference on trauma recovery. The lecture hall was full. Psychologists, social workers, law students. I stood behind the podium and scanned the room, and in the second row I saw Liam. He had his notepad, just like when he was a boy drawing superheroes with overdeveloped emotional arcs. But now, he was taking notes not on my survival, but on how to guide others through theirs. My talk wasn't polished. I stumbled once or twice, but I told the truth. That survival isn't linear, that justice doesn't always look like handcuffs or verdicts. Sometimes it looks like reclaiming a house, or closing a bank account, or waking up without panic. Sometimes it looks like a son growing up to become everything his father never was. I ended with a story. Not about Ethan, or the money, or even the betrayal, but about the moment I first saw myself not as someone left behind, but as someone becoming. It was the morning after I collapsed in the hallway. Liam had handed me a drawing. I had been hooked, up to IVs, my body weak, my spirit frayed, but in that picture I wore a cape. I was flying. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always happen when you're ready. It happens when someone reminds you you're capable, and when you begin to believe it. After the talk, a student approached me, shy, eyes wide, moin. "Mom went through something like this," she said. "I never knew how to talk to her about it, but maybe now I will." That was the moment I realized why I kept telling this story. Not for closure, not for sympathy, but for connection. Because if my story, our story, could become someone else's bridge, then none of the pain was wasted. And now, on quiet mornings, when the rain taps on the window panes of our modest home, I sit with my tea and reread old journal entries. Not to relive the past, but to honor the version of myself who had every reason to give up, and didn't. I think of Charleston sometimes, of the girl I was before Ethan left, the woman who kept searching for answers in the shadows. I send her love silently. She did her best. She kept going. And because she did, I get to be here now, whole, unshaken, free. And if I've learned anything from this long, winding journey, it's this: the past doesn't define you. But the way you respond to it, that becomes your legacy. So if you're reading this, still raw, still reeling, wondering if you'll ever feel safe again, listen to me. You will. And not just safe. You'll feel strong, brave, clear, free. Because everything they took from you is something you can reclaim, piece by piece, until your life belongs to you again. It did for me, and it will for you. Just keep going. Rachel's story isn't just about heartbreak. It's not even just about betrayal, though that's where it began. Her journey is a portrait of what happens when the floor disappears beneath you, when the person you trusted most becomes the very reason your world collapses, and how, somehow, you rise anyway. She began like many women do, believing in the promise of partnership, building a life around shared dreams, trusting that love, despite imperfections, would hold. But Ethan didn't just leave. He abandoned her with a financial disaster, emotional ruin, and a child to raise on her own. He drained their savings, stole her stability, and tried to vanish into a new life with another woman, using Rachel's name and Rachel's debt to fund it. What followed could have broken her. And for a while, it nearly did. Panic attacks, hospital visits, isolation, the terrifying collapse of her health, and the weight of being everything for her son, Liam. It was raw. It was real. But even in the darkest hour, something inside her refused to die. It was Liam, her son, who saw her pain before she could name it, who offered his own small hands to help carry a burden he never should have had to share. He was the catalyst, the spark. Through him, Rachel saw not just what she had lost, but what she still had to fight for. And so she did. She tracked down the stolen van. She built a legal case. She gathered evidence and faced Ethan not with tears, but with calm, steady power. She didn't ask him to apologize. She made him answer. Through the courts, she secured justice. Through her resilience, she reclaimed her life. But what makes Rachel's story so powerful isn't just that she survived. It's that she transformed. She didn't rebuild the same life she had before. She chose a different one. She didn't just recover from betrayal. She redefined what strength looked like. Her scars didn't silence her. They sharpened her. And from her pain, she created something meaningful. A book, a movement, a new way of showing up for others going through what she once did. 15 years later, she lives a life that looks nothing like the one she planned, and everything like the one she earned. Her son is now a man who advocates for justice, whose values were shaped by watching his mother choose dignity over despair. Rachel didn't just raise a child, she raised a legacy. And when we look at her story, we see more than just survival. We see a blueprint. Because whether or not we've experienced the exact betrayal Rachel faced, most of us know what it feels like to be left, to be lied to be reduced by someone we trusted. And we also know the fear of rebuilding, of not knowing how or where to begin. Rachel teaches us that we don't have to have all the answers, that healing isn't a perfect arc, but a series of brave, imperfect steps, that justice may take time, but peace can be built in the meantime, and, most of all, that we don't have to wait for someone to save us. We can save ourselves, and in doing so, become more than we ever imagined. So what's the lesson here? And how can we use it in our own lives? It's simple, but powerful. Your identity is not tied to the person who broke you. It is defined by what you do next. We live in a world where people leave, where jobs disappear, where health fails, where people you gave your best to walk away with the things you built together. But that loss, as devastating as it is not the end. It's a turning point. If you're going through something now, whether it's betrayal, financial hardship, or the lonely ache of starting over, ask yourself, what do I still have? What haven't they taken? Do you have your mind, your will, your voice? Start there. Learn what Rachel learned. Get informed. Know your rights. Ask for help. Find your tribe. Stop hiding your story. Speak it. Write it. Share it. Build something new, no matter how small it feels at first. Rachel didn't just reclaim her money. She reclaimed her meaning. And that's something no one can take away. Now let's pause for a moment and hear from you. Here's a quick question for you to answer in the comments. If you were in Rachel's position, left with a child and a mountain of debt, what would be your first instinct? A. Focus on legal action and getting justice immediately. B. Focus on emotional healing first and figure out the rest later. Type your answer in the comments. A or B. We'd love to see how you think and how you might navigate a similar situation. And we want to hear more from you. What do you take away from Rachel's story? Have you ever faced a betrayal that changed your life? What helped you get through it? Or what do you wish you had done differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your experience. You never know who you might inspire today. And if Rachel's journey moved you, even a little, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Stories that reflect the struggles, strength, and silent victories so many people live through every day. This isn't just content, it's connection. Stay with us for more powerful stories just like this, because the journey to healing doesn't end here. It's just beginning.